George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Virginia, 30 miles south of his brother-in-law's estate, Mount Vernon. He grew up as a surveyor, which was tedious but well-paying. He joined the Virginia militia when he was in his early 20s. He left when he was 26 years old. He inherited the Mount Vernon estate when his brother-in-law's wife died. He joined the Continental Army in June 15, 1775. Because of his close ties with Congress, Washington became the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. George Washington's style of leadership and military tactics were key to our success in the Revolutionary War and the development of our nation. As a general in the British Army, he was respected and was aware of his surroundings. Even though the army lost many battles, his regiment was respected throughout the colonies. They were brave, disciplined, and willing, even if under major fire from the French. When his regiment was against the French, they would stand fast and keep firing, while the rest, the British regulars, were fleeing, getting sniped by French and Indian warriors. George Washington left the British Army after 6 years of active military duty. He left because he became outranked by every British officer in the British Army. He then decided to join the colonials because he had thought that the British were taxing goods too high. When he joined, he was elected to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He was very interested in spycraft. He loved reading about it and loved implementing it in wartime. He was very good at using the nighttime as cover to retreat or attack the British Army. A few major examples include the siege of Fort Ticonderoga and the battles of Trenton and Princeton. He also had an intricate web of spies that could retrieve information quickly and be depended on to bring it to Washington. He also pioneered new ways of sending secret messages. He found that using one chemical to write an invisible message and revealing it with another chemical was better than using an acid, such as milk or lemon-lime juice. He also created a spy ring, which was like a group or ring of spies called the Copers. He was great at using the terrain around him to his advantage. He was a surveyor in his youth and was familiar to the geography of the northeastern states, like Virginia and Pennsylvania. When he was in battle, if he needed to retreat, he used Mother Nature's fortresses, which were hills. It also helped that his army was adapted to the land, while the British army was not as well accustomed. Not only life as a surveyor helped Washington win the war, but also his courage, determination, and bravery as a tactician. Another thing that helped was that the French allied themselves with America and declared war on Britain, because Washington's army convinced the French by winning the Battle of Saratoga, which allowed the Americans to get more supplies and troops. The alliance was beneficial for the army, as it not only gave them troops, but it also gave them a new sense of hope and courage. The alliance helped the Americans win many more battles, which eventually led to the end of the Revolutionary War.
Understand that. Washington understands you must have a strong relationship with political leaders, with civilian leaders, and with individuals. And as Mark talked about the war of hearts and minds, Washington understands that so much better than many others when the Revolutionary War comes about, because he doesn't see anybody as being too small to communicate with or too insignificant to communicate with. He works on the principle, as a commander and as a political leader later on, make friends before you need them.
Washington had an intricate web of connections, but he knew that he needed to befriend them. He knew that he needed to be as close to the civilian-run Congress to get the supplies and the support the army needed. It also helped that he was part of Congress during the early stages of the Revolution. Another thing that he did was he associated himself with the French, longtime rivals of the British, so he could get the supplies his army needed, from weaponry to clothes to fresh food. He was persuasive, as he was the commander-in-chief of an army, so he was pretty influential. Not only was he influential because of his rank, but also because he was persuasive in the way he talked. His rank changed during the course of the Revolution. At first he was a general for the Virginia regiment, which was something he had gotten from the death of his stepbrother. He was very skilled in training his troops and fighting with them, but he eventually was outranked and decided to leave the regiment to become a farmer. After a few years, he became a congressman working in Virginia, which boosted his social ranking. Then, with his military past, his personality, and his close ties with Congress, he got elected to become the commander-in-chief of the newly formed Continental Army. He used his position to shape the army into a legitimate fighting force. They were capable of outmaneuvering the British in times when, without Washington, would have been impossible. The army was trained in guerrilla warfare, which is a way of fighting that military still use today. This tactic frustrated the British because the Continentals left as quickly as they came. The Battle of Trenton on December 26, 1776, is an amazing example of George Washington's cunning and flexibility. In the Battle of Trenton, he took his entire army across the Delaware River to attack a Hessian, or German, garrison.
Perspective, it's interesting to walk outside and just imagine Washington's crossing of the Delaware. But the real trial was even after the river crossing, which was a 9-mile march at night through a snowstorm through New Jersey to Trenton. For us today to imagine really what it was like, especially when these men were ill-clothed and ill-trained and didn't even have protective gear for their flintlocks.
This ultimately resulted in Trenton's capture by the Patriots. This was an important battle because it gave hope to the worn-down army. This battle also helped them capture Princeton, as they used Trenton as a decoy to cover where the army really would be. They set up a fake camp the night before and marched to Princeton to attack the British there. This was helpful because the British army could have taken New Jersey, which would have blocked off communications to and from New England. The siege of Fort Ticonderoga is a great example of General Washington's night tactics being put to work. The detachment that Washington sent to seize the fort did just that, while hurting and killing no one. They also pointed the cannon in the fort at the British army, during which point the general of the British army is quoted of saying, "They had done more work in one night than my army could do in months." The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point in the war because the main army, led by General Cornwallis of the British Army, surrendered their forces, which consisted of an upward of 8,000 troops, which surrendered on October 19, 1781. This was major because not only did it defeat a large portion of the army, but it also convinced the French to join the Continental Army fully. That meant the Continentals had a naval power equal to Britain's on their side, which was helpful to them because their navy was weak. Not only was this one of the last major battles of the war, but it was also a major weakener to British forces, who gave up several months later. The surrender of the troops astonished Washington because he realized that he now had more weaponry to distribute to the troops. It also astonished him because now he had taken up a large portion of the British army. George Washington's largest display of power and leadership was his resignation from it. He was the first president and spent 2 terms in office, but the people wanted him to stay another term in office. He knew that the civilians, not the generals and commanders, should govern the country because people didn't want their country to be ruled by a monarch. So when Washington resigned, he became one of the most famed men of his time. Not only did Americans respect what he had done, but even his old rival, King George, was impressed by his step down from power, calling Washington the most well-known man of his time. His legacy as a general might not be as well known as his presidency, but it was still powerful. The battles he and his army faced tested them and shaped the way our military fights today. Not only did he fight to defeat the British, but he also fought to protect America's newfound freedom. He not only was a great leader at that time, but he also shaped the way leaders of many nations are today. He stood up for what's right and fought for the things that still ring true in America today: liberty, justice, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. George Washington's style of leadership and military tactics were key to our success in the Revolutionary War and the development of our nation.